Alrighty, hello, good morning. It's Monica from Life is Art, and this is the Friday 10 a.m. technique at the epic 1990s birthday celebration online crop. And it's an exciting decade for sure. Lots of interesting facts and trivia that we've been looking at in regards to the 1990s. Now, some of you might have been very young in the 90s. Some of you may have been a little older in the 90s. I know I was in my late teens, early 20s in the 90s, and definitely an interesting time. So this morning we're going to be looking at a few things from our current January, February catalog. We are going to be looking at the Mix-In paper collection, and this is an interesting paper collection. We have one in every 2-month catalog. And what it is it is a selection of pattern papers that are in colors that mix in with the two featured paper collections in the catalog. However, they are just focused on colors and patterns, so they would incorporate into any collection that you have that feature those colors or that would be coordinating with those colors. So we have Ballerina, we have Periwinkle, Bluebird, Jade, White Daisy, and Black in this collection, and some lovely soft patterns and a few bolder colors as well. And we're also going to be looking at one of my favorite stamp sets from this catalog. This was one of, well, I'm pretty sure it was the first thing in my cart when the new catalog became available, and that is called Legendary stamp set, and it has these really cute Highland cattle, and so we're going to be using that stamp set today. We're also going to be using a couple things from our core catalog, and our core catalog is the catalog that's available all year long. I'm just checking to make sure my video is focusing. Give me 1 second. See if we can get it to be a little less blurry. That helps somewhat when we kind of do that, get it to focus down here on the table. It's hard when I'm flipping pages and things because it kind of goes out of focus. But if you're joining me live, just say hello or howdy so I know you're here. And if you're watching later on replay, you can just say replay. I see Laura's watching. Good morning, Laura. And my mom is here too. Hi, Mom. And so from the core catalog, we're going to be looking at one of our very sort of essential basic tools, and that is our small round water brush. You'll find that on page 18. We're also going to be using some bling. We're going to use some of the dots, and our dots come in beautiful color families, and so you can find those on page 21 in the catalog. All right, so let's get started. We're going to be creating a card today, and this card is called a split panel card. So it's an oldie but a goodie, and it's one that it's nice to go back to every so often. For those of you who may be noticing that your video is blurry, and if it's not the fault of my camera, you can sometimes adjust the settings on your YouTube to request a different quality of video. And that should help. I think Heather was mentioning that the other day. So for our split panel card, we're going to need a couple pieces for our card base. And the first piece we need is 4 1/4 by 7 1/2. I'm using Mulberry. And then the second piece we need is 4 1/4 by 2 inches. Now, I'm not going to be doing a whole lot with those right now, but I will do a little bit of scoring. So this larger piece, the 4 1/4 by 7 1/2, I'm going to put it horizontally here on my Versamat, and I'm going to create a score line for the fold in my card. So let me just grab my ruler and my bone folder, and we're going to make this a standard size card. So it's going to be 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So I'm scoring along this 7 1/2 inch side at 5 1/2. And I've got my true color side of the Mulberry showing up, so that will be the outside front of my card. And that is all the scoring we need to do for this kind of card. So then we can just flip it over so that our bump side is to the inside. We can fold that 2-inch tab over and give that a crease down. And then that's all we're going to do with our card base for now. We will come back to that in a little while. So let's grab a piece of white daisy cardstock. Now, I'm going to be doing a little bit of a technique that requires a little bit of messiness. And sometimes you have to be careful using the white daisy for messy things because it's not a watercolor paper, right? It's just plain cardstock. But it does hold up to this technique if you're not too aggressive and if you don't get too excessive. Excessive and aggressive, you don't want to do for this. But it's a fun technique. And it, if you've ever had a stamped image that you don't want to color, or you don't want to take the time to color, or you want a different look, this is a fun, interesting sort of watercolory technique that creates some color and something a little bit different. So we're going to give it a try. Hey, Heather, nice to see you're watching. And Deborah's here too. Oh, good morning, ladies. So I've got my Mulberry ink here, and this is one of the beautiful colors in the second collection in the catalog, which is called... I'm gonna look here because I think it's Sweet Memories, but my brain has shut down. Yes, Sweet Memories. And Mulberry is one of the featured colors in that collection. So we're going to use it here because it'll look really nice with those mix-in papers that we're using. So I'm going to take my ink pad. If you've ever used any of our ink pads, you will know that these ink pads have magnetic closure and they have a lid. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give my ink pad a really good squeezy, squeezy, squeeze and transfer some of that ink to the lid. I'm also going to take one of my acrylic blocks and I'm going to add some ink onto it just because I want to make sure I have lots of ink before I start. Now I'm using some water, so I'm going to take my ink pad and put it way far away from where I'm working so that I don't have any accidents, if you know what I mean. All right. So I've got water in my water brush. My water brush is old and, you know, different times inks have gone up inside of it, so it's a little less than clear looking, but it's fresh water. And what I'm going to do is, the water does come out naturally, but I want a little extra water. So I'm going to squeeze and get a nice drop of water there. And then I'm just going to make myself a nice juicy puddle. But I'm not going to like scratch into the paper. I'm not like shoving my brush into the paper. I'm just getting that water moved around. And then I'm going to pick up the ink off of the lid and I'm going to add it to that puddle. And if you've ever done any kind of watercoloring, you will know that if you prep your paper first by getting some water on there, then your paint or your ink, whatever you're working with, will move around a lot nicer and it won't be as sort of brush strokey as it would be if you just went dry on wet on dry. This is called the wet on wet technique with watercolor. And it works when you're working with ink. So I'm also picking up some of the ink off of my little block here. And now I'm going to stop right there. You will notice that the paper will start to bend. It will start to do all those lovely things that paper does when it gets wet. That's okay. I've got my heat tool on standby. I'm going to use a tissue to clean up the lid of my ink pad so that there's no water left in it. That's important. Once that's all dry, I can put that back onto my ink pad. If you put it on while it's still gooey, you run the risk of watering down your ink. Nobody wants watered down ink unless they're doing a technique. But they don't want it on their stamp pad, because then when you go to stamp later on, it's not going to go well. You're going to have blotchiness and all sorts of things. So always use something else, either a stamp block, the lid of the the ink pad, your all-purpose mat, an acrylic sheet, anything like that. Then, in order to keep working on our project, let's bring in our heat tool, and we're going to dry this. Now, the trick with drying this is that you want to bake it on both sides, is how we phrase it. So we're going to come in with the heat tool on the front side. Now, mulberry is a very soft color, and I've watered it down with water, so that makes it even a softer color. So you're not going to expect a bright, bold technique using mulberry, but I don't want a bright, bold technique. So the baking on both sides means that you run your heat tool on the front side, obviously away from your hand, and you run the heat tool on the back side. And that kind of helps limit the amount of warping, plus it helps to dry it quicker. Now I can see I've got a blob of liquid here that just doesn't want to dry, so I'm going to just dab it because we don't want to take forever to do this drying. It's like watching paint dry, almost literally, ink dry anyway. I love how you get variations in the saturation depending on where the ink hit and settled onto the paper, and where there was more water. It just creates a fun watercolor look. So we're just going to keep going until we think this is pretty dry, because I want to do some stamping on here, and so I want to have it dry. Let me just give this a check. Usually you can feel it. Yeah, it still needs a little bit more. You can also kind of bend your paper. Now, if I was to do watercolor on here and I scrubbed my brush around, what you would find, because this is not watercolor paper, you would find that your paper would eventually start to pill, because as you know, when you get paper wet, the fibers deteriorate, and then you're just going to pull up parts of the fibers. So that's what we want to avoid when we are using water on just plain cardstock. And then we can give it a little bit of some love, rolling it this way and that will help take out some of the warp that naturally happens because you've added moisture in there. Okay, so we've got a fun little watercolor blob. I'm going to bring in my stamp platform for this, and just going to make sure everything's lined up. We're going to tuck this in the corner like that, and you will notice it kind of stands up a little bit, so we want to keep an eye on that when we're doing the stamping. But I'm going to bring in from that fun legendary stamp set, we're going to bring in this cute little stamp right here, the one where he's looking face on, he's got some flowers in his hair. It's actually probably a she because, well, at least the sideways one has an udder, so it's a she, but I usually call things he's. And then we're going to walk that stamp off of our carrier sheet like that. Set that aside. And this is where we can kind of play around with it and decide where we want our image to be stamped. So I want most of my image to be on that lovely pink watercolory background. And so I'm just going to get it on there like that. You may find that you need to reposition after you've done that. That's okay. And you also want to make sure you season your stamp, because this is a new stamp for me. I've only used it a couple times. And so I want to make sure it's seasoned. You can just rub it on your hand or your arm. It's a little bit more difficult to do that on a stamp platform, but you know, we make it work. So I'm going to come in with my intense black ink just because I want black for this. It doesn't really have to be intense black because we're done with the water and the coloring. That was a super simple way to color a stamped image, don't you think? Just put some water on there, drop some ink in there, and dry it up, and away we go. So we've got that inked up. We may need to do it twice, we'll see. And give it a good squish down. Now, if you're using one of these platforms, a lot of people use a whiteboard eraser as something to push it down. There's also fancy tools you can get. I usually just grab a tissue because they're usually on hand in my craft room, and that looks pretty good. I like that these stamped images have sort of that shading effect on them. So you may look at it and you may think, oh, that didn't stamp clearly, but that's actually shading so that you can see all the floofy fur on our cute little coos. All right, so now what I want to do is I want to kind of highlight this by adding a stitched fancy bracket around it. And I'm going to go for the smaller one of the two because I'm actually creating a frame. So I am going to use that other one, or I have already used that other one to create a second layer frame. I'm going to grab a piece of washi tape and then just kind of play around with it till I'm happy with where my cow is in the frame. And I'm kind of liking that. Some of it is getting cut off. I'm okay with that. I was aware that was going to happen. And then bring in my die cut machine and just quickly run that through. Those stitched fancy brackets are still available online. They've been around for a long time. So if you haven't made the plunge and you like to have fun thin cuts like that, it's still available. So there we go. There's our little cow. There's our thin cut. Let's put this away. And I store mine on the floor. That way it's not going to fall any farther. So I use the smaller of the two to cut out my little cow. And I think that makes a really sweet frame. But then I also took a piece of mulberry paper and I cut out using the larger of the two stitched fancy brackets so I can create a nice mulberry frame around that little cow. Isn't that so sweet? I'm loving those cows. You know me. I like cows to begin with, and if they're going to be cutesy, I'm going to need to have them. Now, I'm just checking my focus. I'm not always seeing the picture because I have to scroll down to see your comments. So if you notice that it gets out of focus, just give me a heads up. Say out of focus, and I'll do that process of kind of rearranging the focus there. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to attach those two together using some foam tape. And I've got just the regular foam tape here. Going to add a few pieces. And the good thing about attaching this with foam tape is that if there's any warp in that white daisy from our wet technique that we did on there, it will hold everything in place. It won't let it stay warpy, if that makes sense. It'll hold it all together. All right, let's peel the backing off. And we're going to position that on our mulberry fancy bracket. So I'm keeping kind of all the same colors on this card. I'm using mulberry ink and mulberry paper for the base. I am adding in another color, so it's not going to be all just one color. But I find sometimes with techniques like this that are very sort of monochromatic, I guess, a little more simple, right, where we're coloring, we're not doing fine detail, we're not using our pencil crayons or our markers, that it helps to keep the colors simple on the card itself. So that's our goal, is to keep our colors simple. All right, I was just noticing that had gone blurry again. And to create some interest and to give some other colors, I'm going to bring in some of the mix-in pattern paper from that mix-in collection, and this is in the Sage, and this is a fun geometric image that has the feel of floral, but it's not overly floral because it's so geometric. And there's a lot happening. There's a lot of distressing, sort of fading in and out. There's dots in the background. There's all sorts of fun things that are happening with this pattern. And that helps to make it a lot more interesting. Mom was saying she has that stitched fancy bracket, but had never thought of doing it as a framing technique. So these two pieces of pattern paper have been cut to 4 inches by 1 3/4. And then I'm going to layer them up with a matting of cardstock, also in the sage color. So again, remember, I'm keeping my colors simple. So we've got mulberry and sage and black. Those are the 3 colors we're going to, oh well, and obviously white. But most people don't call black and white colors. They're sort of neutrals. So we're using our sage and our mulberry. So these pieces of cardstock have been cut to 4 1/8 by 1 7/8, and I've got 2 of those as well. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to layer these together. So let's grab our adhesive and let's start stacking. There we go. If you've ever made a split panel card before, you know that you take a regular kind of card, like a top folding card like this, and you split the front panel. So my front panel would normally be the full size. We cut it shorter, cut this chunk off, and we're going to move it down to the bottom. Now there's a gap in the middle, so we're going to have to compensate for that gap, and that's where our lovely little cow comes in. So let's go ahead and we'll layer these 2 up. So we've got a couple techniques going on here. We've got the split panel card. We've got our fun watercolor wet on wet technique. And then our layering, and also the technique of using just a couple colors to have a greater impact. Okay, so now one of these panels is going to be centered on this lower portion of the mulberry, which is 4 1/4 by 2 inches. I think we said that before. And for those of you who are furiously hoping to scribble down measurements, etc., I will post them when I post the photos. If you're ever looking for those measurements and details, when you look at the post, you're going to scroll down past the description. I put that on kind of crooked. You're going to go past the description. Let's see if I can fix it. And you're going to go past the product list, and it will be at the bottom. It'll say dimensions. That's where you're going to look for those details. Okay. Oh, this is coming off all right. Let's see if we can straighten that up, because there's not a lot of space around the edge of this pattern paper and then the matting. So if you do go crooked, it makes a difference, right? All right, so now this second piece is going to get centered on the top here, and I'm actually going to turn it around like this and attach it from this side, because with that crease, it kind of pops up the wrong way away from me, and it makes it really hard to center it. So let's do it this way. Alrighty, lining it up. There we go. Now, I did cut this pattern paper from the same piece of paper. So if I look at it, I'm going to see that this is the same direction. So I want to maintain that down here. Now, in order to have everything line up, I'm going to take a piece of washi tape like this, and I'm actually going to de-stickify it a little bit. And the easiest way to do that is just to stick it on your arm or stick it on your clothes, and it'll pick up the fuzz from your clothes and it'll make itself less sticky. Either that, or you need to find the washi tape in your collection that never seems to stick. And that's what you want to use for this, because I don't want to damage my cardstock. But what I want to do is take this panel and line it right up with the bottom of the back of my card there. And then I'm just going to put this little piece of washi tape there just to hold it. I'm not going to push it down very hard. All I want it to do is just to stay there so that it doesn't move. Then I'm going to take this panel, make sure it's the right way up, and I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to lay it on top of this, and I'm actually scooching it down. I'm not centering it. I'm scooching it down so that there's more on the bottom and less on the top. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add my adhesive, and I can scooch it up a little bit. This will let me know where I need to put my adhesive on so that it's in the right spot, and we're not going to glue our card together in a weird way, if you know what I'm saying. So put a little bit of adhesive at the top, a little bit of adhesive at the bottom, and if you're being careful and whatever, and you want to make sure nothing's ever going to move, you could use red tape for this, the super sticky stuff, or you could use liquid glue, but I'm going to be okay with this. Just add that on there like that, and then we're going to flip it over. We're also going to have it towards the left side. We're going to move it down, and we're going to stick it on, hoping that we're fairly straight-ish, like that. Now we can take off our washi tape that was barely holding on, but it did the job. It kept that piece together. Now when I open my card, you will see that that split panel is now attached because of that little bridge that we've created with our cow and the frame. And because we're using all the same colors, the back side looks fine. It's not kind of you know, if you use different colors, then you get weirdness happening, and sometimes you feel like you need to cover it. But because those are all the same colors, I'm okay with that. Now, I want to add my sentiment on here, and for that, I've got a piece of White Daisy cardstock that I have cut out using my Circles Thin Cuts, those ever popular Circles Thin Cuts that I used all the time. And I'm using the middle size for this, which is a 2-inch circle. So I've cut that out. Oh, pardon me. I got hiccups. And then I'm going to use the "Heard You Had a Bad Day" sentiment for this. And I'm going to stamp that with some intense black ink, just to kind of pick up on the black that's in the stamping for our little coo, our little cow. Going to ink that up, stamp that on there, try and get it semi-centered-ish. Heard you had a bad day. Isn't that cute? Very punny. And then just to give it a little bit more something, I'm going to bring in my Sage ink. And I've got my mini ink blending tool here, loaded up with a foam. And we're just going to ink around the edges with a little bit of that Sage ink. So again, the same color that we've been using all around the edges, like that. And you can do as much or as little of that inking as you like. So again, that was the Sage ink. And let's add a little bit of the thin 3D foam tape to this. I'm going to add just a few snippets. One. We're going to kind of make ourselves a little triangle. We just want a little bit of height. We don't need a whole lot of foam tape on there. And the reason why we put that cow farther down, I'm going to give myself a little bit of defuzzing there. We put this cow so far down because we want to be able to tuck this little circle in at the top. And because our cow's head is tipped, we've got some space here. It seemed like a good way to do it. Hey, Laura, you're loving this? Awesome. So we've got our "Heard You Had a Bad Day," and we can kind of tuck it under that corner, or we can put it on top. But because we use the thin foam tape, I'm going to tuck it under and scooch it right in so that there's still a little bit of the pattern paper showing all the way around, just like that. And then, of course, we need to bring in some embellishing. I've got my purple dots, which you would think that's a weird combination because we've got mulberry, but the mulberry color is in the purple collection. So let's grab our piercing tool, and we're going to use these dots here. Let's take our medium dot, and we're going to tuck that right in there. And then let's take a big one. And what we're doing is we're kind of giving a visual illusion of joining that top and bottom panels together. Make ourselves a little shiny triangle. Gives our card another little texture because there's a little bit of shine on those little acrylic dots. And super cute. These are nice and lightly rounded, so they don't stick out too much. In fact, it's lower profile than even the foam tape that I've got on there. So there we go. We've got our split panel card using that legendary stamp set. We used our split panel technique. We used our wet on wet watercolor technique to add some all over color on our cow without having to do any fancy coloring. We used our 2 dies to layer up and frame that image and span the gap between our 2 panels. Then, of course, we did some inking and stamping here. We did double matting. And now our final step is to add a spot inside to write. And I always find that this is one of the hard bits of a split panel card, is that when you go to write your message, you want to avoid the area where you can see to the front. You don't want to see your little message poking out there, not necessarily anyway. And so what I like to do is I like to take a piece of cardstock that's a little bit narrower than what I'm bridging, do it in a lighter color so it reminds you that's why we put it there, is so we remember where to write. And then we're going to flip it over and put some adhesive on the back so we can stick it in. Then the hard part is, how do we line it up so that it doesn't show, seeing as how we're trying to be so careful to put something in there to write on so that our writing doesn't show. Well, we don't want this panel to show either when our card is closed. So what we're going to do is we're going to open this up. We're actually going to put the panel centered in the spot that we want on the back of the front of the card with our adhesive facing up. So we're going to line it up, make sure it's straight along here, straight along the bottom, kind of equal distant on either side. And then all we have to do is close the back of the card. That adhesive is facing up, and so it's going to stick itself to the back of our card right where we want it. We could do some stamping on there, but I'm going to leave maximum space for writing my message. And now it's not going to show through to the front of our card. So if you've ever had difficulty, just going to get this to focus, figuring out how to layer that up, then just use the inside of your front, adhesive up, and then fold the back over. Perfect way to do it. All right, and then of course this card stands up beautiful for a lovely presentation. So I hope you guys enjoyed seeing that split panel card come together, and we will be back on for Chat and Craft at 11:30, and we hope to see you then. All right, have a wonderful morning. Toodaloo. Bye.